What up, everybody? So, One Piece chapter 780. I ain't gonna lie, man. I like this one. I fuck with this chapter heavy, man. After the last chapter, which, was a little emotional because you had the conclusion of Luffy versus Bellamy, and, Bellamy is once again serving the same role that Law does. Like in the last chapter, Doflamingo basically had Bellamy wrapped around his finger. Doflamingo is what happens when you put faith in a person and then they abuse that faith. And that's what happens like with Bellamy. And then when you look at what's going on here, like Law puts his faith in Luffy and Luffy's crew, but mainly in the Luffy. And he's willing to lay his life down for it. And so it's continuing that dynamic of what I've been talking about, where when you look at how Doflamingo treats his subjects and how Luffy treats his subjects, it's night and day. And so I really like that. And I like the symbolism of how Oda's really writing Luffy to be, for lack of better words, I'm going to use a cliche, he's writing Luffy to be this ray of light that breaks through this long-standing darkness. This is very similar to what happened in Alabasta. It's very simple. It's not simple, it's very similar. And what's really interesting about that is, the parallels are absolutely insane. They're absolutely insane. It's almost as if Oda is mirroring the journey of the Straw Hats from when they reach the Grand Line. If you look at what's going on when they're in the New World, it feels like it's mirroring, where each island by island type of encounter that they had in the Grand Line, a similar things happen in the New World, only the stakes are a lot higher. I mean, this is good, man. This is good. And I also like the fact that, the warlords who on the side of the Grand Line that is the New World, the fact that they're there, it just shows like the power scales just continue to creep up, man. I really like that. Now, I gotta say, before I go into the Luffy versus Doflamingo fight, I gotta say, the whole thing with Doflamingo and Law, that was a little hard to read. I'm not gonna lie to you. The fact that Law named the his crew after Corzin and called them the Heart Pirates, and Doflamingo he just snaps. He's triggered. He's triggered. And I think guilt's the reason why. Because when you look at Doflamingo's character, he's one of those characters where, again, I've talked about before, he values loyalty above anything else, and the people he considers to be family are going to be the people that's loyal to him. And even though, Corzin betrayed him, even though it happened, and even though it probably broke his heart to do so, at the end of the day, it's still his actual blood brother. At the end of the day, that's someone that he spent years growing up with and watching out for. And so to see Law paying respect to Corzin in that way, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think in this moment, I think Doflamingo became extremely unhinged. And I don't know if that has something to do with the fact that Doflamingo's birdcage is shrinking, unless he's just going to shrink the birdcage so it just slices everybody. But then I would think that would put his officers and himself in trouble as well. But I wonder if that has something to do with the birdcage shrinking. Because the thing I could see Oda going for is the cage bird eventually getting out of the birdcage. The caged bird being the people of, where are we at? Of Dressrosa. I could see something like that being the case. And I mean, if that is the case, then good job, Oda. I like that. I like that. I do like that. But, what's interesting is how Doflamingo is just taunting Law. He was like, yeah, you survived the hell of White Town. You went through all this. We were able to prolong your life for 13 years. You just hated me. You lived off of that vengeance and a false promise. You truly lived a pathetic life. And when you get past the ribbing that he's doing, he's actually not that wrong. And I'll explain to you why. So, yes, on one hand, he's absolutely right. It is pathetic, and he's definitely trolling. But when you allow someone to take up that much space in your brain and that much space in your heart, you can never really move forward. And yet at the same time, I think he's missed the fact that Law has moved forward by honoring Doflamingo's brother, Corzin, and by starting that crew and carving his own path and coming up with his own plans, he still had a way to move forward. Is it still centered around Doflamingo? You can argue that, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. But at the same time, like I get what they're trying to do there. So I mean, I'm not gonna knock them for that. I'm really not gonna knock Oda for that. But I just like the reaction Doflamingo had to that. Now, when Luffy burst out, this is probably one of my favorite series of pages because when Luffy bust out, like you see this huge explosion, Luffy's like Doflamingo, and it's just like the level of intensity at that point, right? The level of intensity, and you got Luffy with that madman expression on his face, and Doflamingo saying, "Took you long enough, Straw Hat." So is Bellamy finally free now that I've released him? And Luffy ain't trying to hear none of it, man. Luffy just cocks that piss back. Excuse me, that's messed up. I said cock that piss back, but Luffy cocks that fist back. He, I believe he's getting ready to use Gear 3 because that's where like the fist and everything kind of enlarges. But then he combines it with his armament hockey, and he's just about to run this dude forward, right? Doflamingo just casually lifts his hand and blocks it with the spider web, and Luffy says, "You knew he wouldn't run." And Doflamingo's continuing to just push that button. I mean, like when it comes to psychologically, Doflamingo has the high ground. He has the high ground on Luffy. I think that's probably one of the things that, is probably going to have him push Luffy, if not get the upper hand, is that when Luffy gets emotional like that, he runs through you. But at the same time, he's very open for being manipulated to where you can turn the tables on him because of concentration issues. I mean, I do like that. I do like that. And I like how when Luffy just jumps up and is, okay, you block that, fine. He goes with the Gum Hawk Gatling, which, the Hawk, that's obviously paying homage to Ace. I like how Doflamingo ain't trying to have that. He ain't trying to have it. And one of the things he does, he hits him with the same thing he told Law. He says, like, hey, just fighting me is enough. You're going to have to fight both of us, Doflamingo and Trebol. And what's crazy about that is how when Luffy sees Law, he steps in his blood and he's just freaking out. And I think at this point, I think Doflamingo hit the Luffy button. Because if Law is dead, and while Luffy doesn't have the same relationship with Law that he did with Ace, this would be yet another person Luffy can protect. This would be another person who died believing in Luffy. And that's so crazy. That's so crazy. Because in the chapter you got Law saying like, yeah, well, I'll give you immortal life if you bring Corzin back to life, and then if you go kiss the ass of every person on Dressrosa, then he flips them off. Like, that was a badass moment, by the way. But, for this, Luffy's starting to break. Luffy's starting to break right there. And what's crazy about that is Doflamingo is continuing to just push the button. And if he wants to get Luffy so pissed off to where he isn't thinking and he can read his movements better, he's accomplishing his job. Because Doflamingo tells him, he says, "I hear you're quite the miracle worker, Straw Hat. You didn't seem all that strong to me based on our fight, and now you gotta fight me and Trebol." And Doflamingo declares he's gonna wrap things up, man. And it's funny because Viola does say, like, she says, like, we've taken a considerable loss as well. We've taken a really considerable loss. This is gonna be interesting, man. This is gonna be really interesting to kind of see where Oda takes this next part going forward. But I want to ask you guys, right? Keeping up with the tradition of the chapter reviews, I want to ask you guys, like, when you got to this point, what you think about Law naming his crew the Heart Pirates in respect to Corzin? What do you guys think about that? I think that's a nice way to pay homage. But as always, guys, if you like anything I had to say, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Have an awesome day, guys.